It was during that police interview in 2013, Alan Scheiback discussed the challenges in his relationship with his common-law wife, Lisa Mitchell. That same year, nearly 12 months after Mitchell went missing, police staged a collision to establish a false relationship with Scheiback. An undercover female officer told a Calgary courtroom earlier this month how she intentionally drove into Scheiback's car as an opportunity to meet the suspect. The sting, dubbed Operation Aurora, led to Scheiback's alleged confession and arrest. Scheiback has been charged with second-degree murder and interfering with the body. He has pled not guilty. Greg, this sting isn't a first of its kind for police. What do these Mr. Big operations typically consist of?
Michael, Mr. Big's originated really, it's a Canadian police invention. It originated in the 1980s. And they're essentially very complex, generally investigations that go over a fairly long period of time. And police use them when they got no other leads. The case has gone cold, but they suspect that they have someone that may be a suspect in an investigation. And what they entail is a complex investigation in which the target is essentially seduced into a fictitious organized crime, a criminal organization. And so what happens is there'll be an initial meeting, like in this particular case, in which they'll stage a car accident, and then they'll meet this individual, and they'll seduce this individual in terms of sending him on small errands, promising him gifts, promising him some money, and eventually the individual works his way up in this fictitious criminal organization. And he works himself up to a point in which he's going to be promised to be part of essentially the ruling order of the criminal investigation. But before he can partake in that, he has to meet Mr. Big. And he has to be forthright with Mr. Big. And he has to tell Mr. Big the whole truth. And this particular meeting is used to glean essentially a confession for what really is otherwise a police interview. And overall, they're extremely effective. They almost always obtain confessions from individuals because these guys really want to be part of the criminal organization. And some of them tend to be false, and some of them tend to be true and tend to be accurate.
Okay, now similar operations have been criticized in Canadian courts. In some cases, evidence has been ruled inadmissible. Greg, when should evidence be allowed in the courts?
Well, historically, look, defense lawyers have been fighting these particular Mr. Big operations for a very long period of time. We were always of the view that they had considerable issues with respect to the reliability of the statements because of the enormous amount of pressure that's exerted on these individuals. And they've always been deemed to be admissible. And the reason is because they're cleverly designed to fall outside of really Canadian constitutional protections. A recent decision of R versus Hart, or Regina versus Hart, which came out of the Supreme Court of Canada, kind of flipped the law on its head. And it said that these confessions that arise from these Mr. Big operations or crime boss investigations are going to be presumptively inadmissible, and that the Crown's going to have to show that they're reliable. So essentially, they're not admissible anymore. That case has changed the landscape. The Crown has now got the burden to show that they're admissible and that they're reliable. And what they'll do is they'll essentially rely on evidence in respect to the nature of the investigation, the frailties or not frailties of the target. And what's especially important in determining reliability is what we call holdback information. If this particular individual knew a lot about the event, a lot about the particular offense, he had specific details that were not released to the general public, which comported with what we call police holdback information, then the statement's going to be seen as inherently reliable and possibly admissible in a court of law.
Okay, Mark, how far should police be allowed to push the limits in order to get to the truth?
Well, I think our police always need to be innovative. They need to look at ways to solving crime and in working with all sorts of resources that they have. And I think that, as Greg had said, is that the true gatekeepers are our courts and our defense lawyers. So I think that, you know, I like to see police in this incident. They were very innovative. They looked at ways to sort of, you know, get to the truth. And I think as in the area of community safety and for the, you know, aspect of justice, that we have to give our police the responsibility and a wide berth to do their investigations. And as long as it falls in with the parameters of our charter and our constitution, then I think that's okay. And again, we have our court system to vet that. And if it's inappropriate, then it's to nobody's interest, including the police, if someone's acquitted based on a breach of their rights.
And Monetta, where should the parameters be in terms of usage?
Well, we have to be very careful about usage because while I agree with Mark that the police need to use every tool at their discretion, they need to use these tools in order to do their job. Some reports, or a report suggests that up to 25% of these confessions can be false confessions. And we know that some populations are more subjected to false or susceptible to false, confessing falsely. For instance, as Greg described, if you're befriending someone and you have someone who's craving that friendship or craving that connection, those individuals are more likely to falsely confess than other individuals. Or if they're seen as some reward, financial reward, then we have individuals who are marginalized financially more likely to confess. So there has to be a lot of parameters around the usage and the practices that the police engage in. But here's where I agree with Mark again, is that the courts then really have that responsibility to vet that evidence. And as Greg suggested, the prosecutor has the responsibility to show that that information is reliable, given kind of those questions around false confessions.
Okay, time for a break. But when we come back, the bundling of legal services for Albertans and changing policies for transgender inmates. More from our crime panel in a moment.